Good morning. It would appear that I have somehow got my footage a little out of order, but that's okay. So, this is where we're starting off. We've got the speakers all built and mostly carpeted. We've got wiring pretty much sorted out. I'm just working on grouping the wires so that I can make sure that they're all exactly how they need to be, and then I will work on installing everything, and we'll get everything tested, and we'll get everything make sure there's no issues. You can see there my work companion Kernighan has decided she wants to investigate the boxes from the speakers. Typically a common occurrence. Kitty in a box. If you've never dealt with kitty in a box, you should probably look that up. Lots of videos about that. This is probably the most tedious part. Just trying to strip all the wires and then get them all tinned and get them all ready for soldering. The work is now being inspected, and I don't know whether she approves or disapproves. These are kind of weird bundles because these are the attenuator and mid-high bundles, and that was a little odd to wire up. It makes sense once once you think about the electronics, but the way that it works is that you've got there's 3 pins, and pin number 3 is ground, so the ground goes from the crossover to pin 3 and then directly to the device, the woofer or the horn. The positive goes to pin 1, and then pin 2 goes to the woofer or horn. So the positive comes into pin 1, goes into the attenuator, and then out the attenuator through pin 2 to the device, and then follows the ground back to the attenuator and then back to the crossover. And that allows the attenuator to do its job, so it's controlling how much power is actually going through the attenuator versus how much power is just going through the horn or tweeter. And I wasn't sure exactly how much of a benefit this was. I knew I wanted it just because I wanted that extra bit of control. But now that we've actually done the wedding and I've tested the sound in a few different rooms and with a few different setups, it actually does make a noticeable difference, and it does give me that little extra bit of control. Although people look at you kind of weird when you've got somebody behind a speaker and you're flashing numbers to them and they're playing with the speaker, and I don't think most people can hear the differences, or at least don't recognize the differences. So I got a lot of odd looks while we were setting up, but that's okay. The difference isn't a hugely noticeable difference, but it just does give that extra little bit of control and that little ability to make sure that the sound, specifically the voices, is what I'm wanting to double check, and to make sure that the goal is that the horn is not overly bright, and that the voices are loud enough to be clear, but not so loud that they're starting to overpower any of the other sounds. And while you can do this with the mixer's three-way crossover, I feel like it gives me just extra control over the speakers themselves, because then I can pick a song that I'm familiar with and go stand in the middle of the room, turn off one channel, so the left side of the room, for instance, then I have two speakers left, so I can adjust the one while the other one is static, and I can compare how it sounds to me, and then when I get done we could just go adjust all the other three speakers, and then the sound, the speakers themselves are basically tuned to the room, so to speak. And then if I need to adjust things based on the song, I can use the mixer, and I don't have to worry about where things are at, because then I know I can come back to 0 on the crossover. If I have to turn a horn down for a super bright song, for instance, then when I'm done with that song, I can turn that back up to 0, and then I know the next song is reset. And so these are the attenuators. That's what I was mentioning. So there's the 3 pins, and I'm just going to go through and quickly tin each one, each of the pins. And then start wiring. And with a good tinning job, I don't usually need to add extra solder, but sometimes I do. This one particularly didn't want to cooperate. And soldering is always something where I need 2 extra sets of hands. At one point I actually had like a little stand kind of a thing that I had built to I would strap the soldering iron to this little stand, so it kind of stuck out at a downward angle, and that would allow me to hold the board and the wire and then just touch both of them to the soldering iron. And if I had a decent tinning, then that was usually sufficient, and that worked a lot. Worked really well. I will probably do something similar for the next time. But I just haven't done that yet. So it is what it is. But having the colored wiring from the old speaker wires actually made a pretty noticeable difference. It made it much easier to kind of see how things are going. So the 12-inch woofer got a red and black wire, and then the the 4-inch woofer got a green and white wire, and then the horn got that, and then the 4-inch woofer got a black and red that I ended up just putting a little bit of yellow tape, as you can see, kind of in the slightly off center to the right of the center of the table. I don't know that that's necessary, but it definitely comes in a little bit handy to just see how things are, different as you're putting it all together. And like I said, I'm just trying to do a kind of an assembly line. Get all of one step done, get all of the next step done, just to try and get this all completed as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So now that everything's ready, I'm just working my way through soldering to each of the PCB boards. And while I don't have a direct comparison, I definitely have to say that the sound quality, having built this three-way speaker, is definitely worth the additional cost compared to the older two-way speakers. And if you remember, I mentioned in a previous video that the old system was built kind of odd. It had multiple different sizes of woofers to try and account for the different frequencies that each size actually likes to be, resonating at. And so it was a cheap attempt at trying to create a more versatile system, and it kind of worked. I mean, I don't know that it was hugely noticeable compared to, like, if I'd have just had 6 12-inch speakers instead of 2 12 and 2 10 and 2 8. But this definitely sounded far better than what I remember, with the clear caveat that memory can be fallible. It was definitely a good fun time hearing everything at the wedding. And while it was a little hectic and stressful trying to get everything ready in time, I would definitely say it was worth it. And especially knowing that my daughter's experience was the best that I could make it. It was definitely good to be able to see family and just to have that time. We tried to spend as much time with family as we could while we were down there, and that's been one of the harder things about living 3 states away, or 2 states away, I guess, depending on how you route it. But here I'm just continuing on with the prep. I'm just working on the tinning the connectors for the woofers and horns, and then I can start actually assembling. Since things go in different holes, I'll put the crossover in. You can see this is the one I'd started the other day, and so now I'm gonna solder the wiring for the 4-inch. Then I'll put the woofer and the horn in. And at this point I'd already completed the subwoofers, so the 15s are done. And as soon as we get done with this, we'll be able to test it, which was fun. You can see there's light coming through the boards. That's actually been something that really surprised Emily, as we've had the spare room here and watched as things change. The amount of shrinkage that happens in the boards has really surprised her. She's commented on it a couple of times, and it's not just that the cottonwood shrinks more than other boards, which it does. It's also the therefor that we have in for the subfloor. Now that it's starting to dry, it actually, you can tell some of the boards have started to come loose. There's a much more noticeable gap. I mean, when I put them in, there is as little gap as possible, and there's definitely a distinct gap there. So this is what I look like when I'm stressed over a issue that I have to fix. This is what I was mentioning in yesterday's video about the top hat was just literally a half an inch too far forward, and I don't really have a measurement. I'm going to move the camera here and get you a better angle of what I'm talking about. But I don't really have a measurement for where to place this, aside from that I obviously want it in the center from left to right. But I just sort of have always guessed as far as how the position needs to be forward and back, knowing that most of the weight of the speaker is in the face, because that's where all the speakers are. I put it forward of center, and we counted the other day, and I've over the last 20 plus years that I've been doing this, I've built so far a total of 27 speakers, and 2 of them were actually commissioned for someone else. They asked me to build them and sell them a pair of speakers, which was kind of fun. They wanted a pair of 10-inch woofers for their home theater system, and they wanted them to be finished with a black stain, which was, like I said, kind of fun. It was a little bit of a challenge to sort and figure out, but most of the speakers have been carpeted, and most of them have been for my own systems, and then I end up selling them as I upgrade, or as I, a lot of them were sold when we, actually not lot, all of them were sold when we moved to Washington. So anyway, I just kind of guessed. There were a few of them that I tried, and I would actually I'd set the top hat down on a level surface and then try and adjust the speaker on, like, rest it on the top hat and kind of try and balance it, and that was more headache than it was worth. So I've just kind of always winged it, and this is actually the first time I've ever made a mistake on them, and it was only, like I said, a half an inch too far forward, so the magnet, or the shell of the speaker would bump it, and it prevented it from being able to be screwed in, which was just super annoying. So when I build the next 4 and upgrade the system, I'll have to take a measurement off of this, and that way I can put it in the right spot for the first time. I think I might have just gotten luckier on older speakers, because I never had the extra space requirement that the mid-woofer created. So I think on these I just probably had the speaker lower on the face than I usually do. And I gotta tell you, this was the most awkward portion of building these. The little nut on these attenuators is really quite annoying. Having a second set of hands would have been very beneficial, but I was just working and didn't think, oh, I could have Emily come and help, and she could totally do this. I think I thought about that on the third one and was like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm almost done. You can see there that little crescent moon shape. Like I really didn't have to take hardly any at all. And then I just turned the top hat at an angle so that the bolts would have as much distance between the new holes and the old holes as possible. And here I'm just putting some colored tape around the I just forgot what they're called. I want to call them wing nuts, and that's not right. Anyway, the twisting wire connectors. Mostly just for looks. It doesn't really benefit anything. In fact, the connector itself doesn't really do that much since the wires are soldered. But it's just there to provide as much protection as possible. And again, like I said, always vacuuming, always trying to just make sure I'm keeping everything as clean as possible. I think the black carpet looks really good when you have it, but it does admittedly get dirty pretty easy, especially while you're working in a shop that's got some sawdust laying around. That's a pretty big challenge. And these little nuts are like maybe a 1/16 of an inch thick. So I was really hesitant to just use a ratchet or the impact driver, because I didn't want to risk damaging them or stripping the thread on the attenuator. And there we go, the last. Oh, battery on the light finally died. And there the little dishes are now all in place. What I ended up doing was trying to use a socket and just turning the socket by hand. And for most of them that worked. That last one gave me a little bit of a challenge. The nut didn't want to start threading. And this one was definitely the hardest of all of them. So now we've got everything internally attached though, so it's time for the final solderings. And I was a little apprehensive. I don't remember if I mentioned this or not. Usually when I've built speakers, up until this particular run, I have always had a system that we were currently using. So I was never rushed to try and build anything. It was always, ooh, I wonder if I could build this and change this to make it better in this other way, or however, or I wanted to add a bigger speaker or a smaller speaker, or when I built my home theater system, it was, I want to build a system that has this weird capability of using different sizes, but there was always something in place, and so I was never stressed about it. I was never felt rushed. I never had to worry about if it was, if something was wired wrong, I could just take my time and figure it out. Where this one, I couldn't really test everything until it was all said and done, until it was all complete, because the the workspace that I'm using is the space that I needed to be able to set things up to actually test it. So I got a little, like I said, a little apprehensive by the time it was all said and done. And it's not that I don't trust my soldering skills, but you never know. I did actually have an issue with one of the speaker cables, and we spent I don't know, probably half an hour, 45 minutes tracking that down. Somehow I ended up wiring the positive for channel 1 to the negative of channel 2, which isn't it's not a huge deal. It just means that there's no connection anywhere, so the amp doesn't have any signal going anywhere. But it was just one wire, and when we hooked everything up, when I first hooked everything up, everything worked, and then I had the thought, these are new wires, I should probably check the wires too. And so we unplugged a bunch of wires and plugged a bunch of them in, and what I should have done was just unplug one, swap that one out, and then test it and make sure everything still worked. And because I didn't do that, we had to go back through and backtrack and figure out, okay, is this a problem with the wire, or is there somehow a problem with the speaker, with the dish? Is it not, I don't know. But anyway, it ended up being just the wire itself. And this particular box, I had tested it when I cut it, but there was apparently a little bit of a kind of a notch, I guess. And so when I put it in this last time, it didn't sit quite right, so I had to make a little bit of an adjustment there. That way I could push it all the way back. And then had to drill some new holes, because now it's in a slightly different spot. And we can finally put that away and get it all completed. And on speakers, I don't actually know if it's necessary to skip around as you're putting them in. It's kind of a habit, I guess, that I've gotten into over the years, probably from learning to work on cars when I was what, 15, 16, in 10th grade, I guess. Yeah, so 15 before I had my license. But I just always do, I never go in a straight circle all the way around when I'm attaching things. And there we go. One more done. That'll be it for the footage today. The GoPro died, but after I got everything set up, I pulled out the amps, and you can see the red and white tape on the two different amps. That's what I was talking about, how everything ends up being color coded. So it makes the setup very, very easy. I still have to get the carpet on the sub amp box, the 2450 there on the top, the white one. So that's just sitting there, which doesn't really affect anything because the fans and the vents are all in the front and back. The top is designed to not have any heat transfer. And I figured the best way to test everything, since I had to test microphones, was to do some karaoke. Figured why not? I haven't done karaoke in several years. We used to do this at parties all the time, and this was one of the things that I was known for, was bringing karaoke to pretty much everywhere. So, but that's where we'll end it for today. As always, thank you for watching. God bless you and yours, and stay safe and healthy out there.